The shriek of the electric chainsaw was high-pitched and insistent, a furious buzzing that sliced through the otherwise peaceful late afternoon in the Willow Creek estates. Eleanor Vance, carefully maneuvering her power wheelchair down the ramp, her wife Sarah had painstakingly designed and built, felt a jolt of unease tighten her chest, even before she saw the woman standing at the bottom, a figure of rigid indignation in the HOA's branded golf shirt. Brenda Miller. The self-appointed enforcer of Willow Creek's notoriously draconian aesthetic bylaws, a woman whose pursed lips and hawk-like gaze had become a familiar source of low-grade anxiety for many residents. Today, however, her expression was not just critical, it was one of grim determination as she wielded the buzzing saw like a weapon. Then the blade bit into the wood, a shower of splinters erupting, as Brenda attacked one of the ramp's sturdy support beams. The whole structure shuddered violently beneath Eleanor's chair. Her hands clenched the controls, her heart leaping into her throat. The metallic tang of fear flooded her senses. "Stop!" Eleanor cried out, her voice thin and reedy against the saw's whine. "Brenda, what are you doing?" Brenda paused her assault, lifting the still whirring chainsaw sawdust, clinging to her sensible beige cap. Her eyes, magnified behind her tinted bifocals, were hard and unforgiving. "Mrs. Vance, this appendage is in direct violation of Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, Regulation 3.2b, unauthorized structural modifications. It has been deemed an eyesore and a safety hazard." A safety hazard. Eleanor stared at her in disbelief, her mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of the situation. "Brenda, this is my wheelchair ramp. This is how I get in and out of my house. You're the one creating a safety hazard by attacking it with a power tool while I'm on it." Brenda remained unmoved, her grip on the chainsaw firm. "The Architectural Review Committee never approved this construction. We sent you multiple violation notices." "We received no such notices regarding the ramp," Eleanor protested, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. Sarah had meticulously documented every communication with the HOA, and there had been nothing about the ramp since its completion 6 months ago. It was sturdy, well-built, and absolutely essential for Eleanor's independence. Nevertheless, Brenda continued, as if Eleanor hadn't spoken. "It detracts from the overall aesthetic harmony of Willow Creek. The standard concrete steps were deemed perfectly adequate upon the original construction of your residence." She revved the chainsaw again, the sound a menacing snarl. "Consider this your final enforcement action." Before Eleanor could react, before she could even think about how to safely maneuver her chair on the now compromised ramp, Brenda plunged the saw into another support, the wood screaming in protest. The ramp lurched violently one side, dipping precariously. Eleanor's chair tilted alarmingly. For a terrifying moment, she thought she was going to be thrown. She gripped the controls with all her strength, her muscles straining her breath, catching in her throat. The smell of sawdust and hot metal filled the air. Then, with a final rending crack, a section of the ramp near the bottom gave way, completely collapsing onto the neatly manicured lawn with a heavy thud. Eleanor's wheelchair slammed back onto the remaining, now sharply inclined, upper section one wheel, spinning uselessly in the air. She was trapped, precariously balanced, the lower half of her lifeline to the outside world, reduced to a pile of splintered debris. Brenda Miller switched off the chainsaw, the sudden silence amplifying Eleanor's ragged breathing. Brenda surveyed her handiwork with a self-satisfied nod, as if she had just eradicated a particularly stubborn weed. "The remaining portion will need to be removed within 48 hours at your expense." Mrs. Vance, Brenda stated, her voice crisp and officious. She pulled a violation notice from her pocket, oblivious to the terror she had just inflicted. "Failure to comply will result in further fines and potential lien placement on your property. Have a compliant afternoon." And with that, Brenda turned and walked back towards her golf cart, leaving Eleanor stranded helpless and consumed by a white-hot rage that warred with the lingering tremor of fear. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers clumsy, and dialed Sarah's number, her voice thick with unshed tears. The peaceful afternoon in Willow Creek Estates had just been shattered into a million splintered pieces. Sarah Jenkins Vance was in the middle of a crucial conference call, her voice calm and authoritative, as she navigated the intricacies of the state's latest building code revisions when her phone vibrated insistently in her pocket. She rarely took personal calls during work hours, especially not during high-stakes meetings. But the caller ID, L, her heart's anchor, made her stomach clench with a sudden premonitory fear. Eleanor knew her schedule. A midday call meant something was wrong. She excused herself, quickly stepping out of the hushed conference room into the bustling hallway of the State Building Codes and Standards office. "L, honey, what's wrong?" Eleanor's voice on the other end was strained, choked with emotion. "Sarah, you need to come home. Now. It's Brenda Miller. She attacked the ramp with a chainsaw. I'm stuck." "Sarah, I almost fell." The words hit Sarah with the force of a physical blow, the complex jargon of the conference call dissolving into a haze of disbelief and incandescent fury. Chainsaw ramp, Eleanor almost fell. The casual bigotry and petty power trips of their HOA had finally crossed a line, a dangerous, unforgivable line. "What, L, please tell me exactly what happened," Sarah said, her voice tight, with barely suppressed rage. Eleanor recounted the horrifying incident, her voice trembling, as she described the screech of the saw, the splintering wood, the terrifying lurch of her wheelchair. Sarah listened, her knuckles white as she gripped her phone, the blood pounding in her ears. "I'm stuck." Sarah Eleanor finished, her voice laced with fear and a raw, wounded pride. "She just left me here, said it was an unauthorized modification. I'm on my way," Sarah said, her voice low and deadly calm. "Don't you move. I'll be there as fast as I can." "Are you hurt? Any pain?" "Just scared and angry. So incredibly angry." "I know, my love. I'm leaving now. Just hold tight." Sarah hung up her mind, already shifting into a mode of cold, strategic action. Brenda Miller, and by extension, the Willow Creek Estates HOA, had made a grave miscalculation. They had targeted Sarah's wife, their sanctuary, their lifeline, and they had done it completely unaware of who Sarah Jenkins Vance truly was. Sarah didn't bother with explanations. She strode back into the conference room, her face a mask of grim determination. "I apologize, everyone. A serious family emergency requires my immediate attention. Please continue without me." She didn't wait for acknowledgement, didn't offer further details. She grabbed her briefcase and keys and headed straight for her car, her foot pressing down hard on the accelerator. The 20-minute drive to Willow Creek Estates felt like an eternity each second, amplifying the burning fury inside her. She pulled into their driveway to a scene that made her stomach churn. The ramp, the beautiful, sturdy ramp she had designed to perfectly accommodate Eleanor's needs and blend seamlessly with their home's architecture, was a mangled wreck. Jagged pieces of treated lumber lay scattered on the lawn like discarded toys. And Eleanor. Eleanor was perched precariously on the truncated upper section, her power wheelchair tilted at a dangerous angle. Sarah, relief and a fresh wave of tears washed over Eleanor's face as she saw her wife. Sarah was at her side in an instant, her initial rage momentarily eclipsed by a wave of fierce protectiveness. "Elle, my God. Are you all right? Did you fall at all?" She carefully examined Eleanor, her hands gentle but thorough. "I'm okay, just shaken," Eleanor whispered, her hand finding Sarah's. She stood there and did it, with that awful buzzing thing." Sarah's gaze moved from Eleanor to the splintered remnants of the ramp, then to the crisp, white violation notice flapping in the gentle breeze on their front door. "Unauthorized modification," it declared in bold letters, demanding immediate removal of the offending structure. The sheer audacity of it, the callous disregard for Eleanor's well-being, ignited a cold, focused fury within Sarah. They had moved to Willow Creek Estates 3 years ago, drawn by the mature trees and the promise of a quiet, well-maintained community. Eleanor's MS had been relatively stable then. The HOA, run by a clique of overly concerned retirees, led by the formidable and perpetually dissatisfied President Margaret Henderson, had seemed like a minor annoyance with their endless rules about lawn care and holiday decorations. Sarah, whose professional life revolved around the complexities of state building codes, safety regulations, and accessibility mandates, had found their preoccupations almost comical. She paid their dues, kept their yard tidy, and generally avoided any interaction. She had deliberately kept her professional identity private within the community. Here she was, just Sarah Jenkins, Eleanor's wife, a software engineer who worked from home. The ramp had become necessary a year ago as Eleanor's mobility declined. Sarah, knowing the legal protections for accessibility modifications under the Americans with Disabilities Act and fair housing laws, hadn't sought the HOA's permission. It was a necessary accommodation, not an aesthetic choice, and federal law superseded any petty HOA regulations. She had built it herself, meticulously adhering to all state and federal guidelines, ensuring it was not only functional and safe, but also visually appealing using high-quality materials and a design that complemented their house. Brenda Miller, a recent addition to the HOA board and a self-proclaimed community safety advocate, had taken it upon herself to be the chief enforcer of the HOA's ever-expanding list of rules. She patrolled the neighborhood in her electric golf cart, her eyes constantly scanning for violations, her clipboard her constant companion. She had issued them a few minor notices: a perceived infraction regarding the placement of their recycling bins, a complaint about the unapproved color of their porch swing cushions. Sarah had responded to each with polite but firm explanations, often referencing their rights as homeowners. She had no desire to reveal her professional standing and engage in a petty power struggle with a neighborhood busybody. But this was not about a porch swing or recycling bins. This was an act of targeted destruction, a direct assault on Eleanor's independence and safety, fueled by ignorance and a blatant disregard for the law and common decency. "Okay," Sarah said, her voice low and steady, masking the storm inside. "Let's get you inside safely." The remaining section of the ramp was too steep and unstable. "I'm going to have to carry you." Eleanor nodded her trust in Sarah, unwavering. With careful movements, Sarah gently lifted Eleanor from her wheelchair, the lightness of her frame a stark reminder of the insidious progress of her illness. She carried her across the threshold into the familiar comfort of their living room and settled her on the sofa. "I'll get your indoor chair," Sarah said, her movements efficient and purposeful. Once Eleanor was settled, Sarah returned to the porch, her eyes blazing with a cold, controlled fury. She pulled out her phone and began to document the scene. Photographs of the splintered ramp from every angle, the clean cuts on the supports, the scattered debris. Close-ups of the violation notice. Images of Eleanor's power wheelchair, stranded on the broken platform. She recorded everything with meticulous, dispassionate precision. Then she made her first call, not to a contractor, not to the HOA. She called the local police department. "Yes," she said, her voice calm and authoritative. "I need to report a felony. Willful destruction of private property, reckless endangerment, and a clear violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The perpetrator is Brenda Miller, residing at Brenda Miller's address, and acting as an agent of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. The victim is my wife, Eleanor Vance, at this address." She provided a concise account of the incident, her tone firm and unwavering. Her next call was to a senior legal counsel at the State Attorney General's office, a contact she had worked with on numerous code enforcement and disability rights cases. Her third call was to the regional director of the U.S. Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. She was setting the wheels of justice in motion, leveraging every resource at her disposal. While she waited for the police to arrive, Brenda Miller, emboldened by her earlier enforcement action, and perhaps wanting to further assert her authority, returned to their driveway in her golf cart, this time accompanied by Margaret Henderson, the HOA president, a woman whose severe bob and perpetually furrowed brow spoke volumes about her disapproval of anything that deviated from her rigid vision of suburban perfection. Sarah Jenkins Vance. Margaret's voice was sharp and accusatory, cutting through the quiet of the afternoon. "What is the meaning of this commotion?" Brenda informed me she was simply addressing an egregious violation of our community guidelines. Sarah turned to face them, her expression cold and unyielding. "A violation. Margaret, or are you referring to Brenda Miller's decision to attack my wife's wheelchair ramp with a chainsaw while she was on it, thereby committing a felony, endangering Eleanor's life, and illegally destroying her only means of accessible entry to our home?" Margaret's face tightened. "That ramp was never approved. It is not in keeping with the architectural standards of Willow Creek Estates. We have received complaints." "Complaints?" Sarah's voice dripped with disdain. "Or did Brenda simply decide she didn't like it, regardless what provision in your precious bylaws authorizes vigilante action with power tools? There are established procedures for addressing alleged violations, written warnings, hearings, not violent destruction." and certainly not when it directly impacts the safety and well-being of a disabled resident. Brenda stepped forward, her chest puffed out. We sent notices. They were clearly ignored. You sent no notices regarding the ramp, Brenda Sarah stated flatly. And even if you had, your actions today were illegal and reprehensible. You knowingly destroyed a vital accessibility feature protected by federal law. Just then, a police car pulled up to the curb, its lights flashing silently. Two officers, a uniformed patrolman and a detective in plain clothes, emerged. Ma'am, sir. We received a call regarding property damage and a possible assault. Detective Davies, a woman with a calm, professional demeanor, addressed Sarah and Margaret. Margaret immediately launched into her version of events. Detective, thank goodness you're here. This resident, Sarah Jenkins Vance, is causing a disturbance. Our HOA compliance officer, Ms. Miller, was simply removing an unauthorized and potentially hazardous structure. Detective Sarah interjected, her voice calm but firm. My name is Sarah Jenkins Vance. My wife, Eleanor Vance, is disabled and uses a wheelchair. That was her legally protected wheelchair ramp. Ms. Miller, acting under the authority of the Willow Creek Estates HOA, and Mrs. Henderson willfully destroyed it this afternoon while Eleanor was on it. I am pressing charges for felony destruction of property, reckless endangerment, and violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Detective Davies turned her attention to Brenda, who was now looking considerably less self-assured. Ms. Miller, is this consistent with your understanding of events? Brenda stammered. It was a violation, an unapproved structure. I was just enforcing the rules. Did you have a court order authorizing the removal of this ramp? Ms. Miller, Detective Davies asked, her tone sharp. Or written consent from the homeowner? Brenda's face flushed. Well, no, but the HOA bylaws. HOA bylaws do not supersede state and federal law, Ms. Miller, especially when it comes to the rights of disabled individuals, the detective said pointedly. She turned back to Sarah. Mrs. Jenkins Vance, you mentioned ADA violations. Yes, detective. This ramp is a necessary accommodation for my wife's disability. Its destruction is a clear violation of the ADA and fair housing laws. I have already contacted the State Attorney General's office in the U.S. Department of Justice. The mention of federal authorities seemed to visibly shock Margaret Henderson. Her severe posture finally faltered. Brenda Miller's confident facade crumbled, replaced by a look of dawning fear. Detective Davies took statements, examined the splintered ramp, and photographed the scene extensively. She spoke with Eleanor, who recounted the terrifying incident in a calm but devastatingly clear voice. The patrolman took Brenda Miller aside, and Sarah watched as Brenda's protests grew increasingly agitated before being cut short by the officer's firm hand on her arm. Ms. Miller, Detective Davies said, her gaze unwavering. You are being detained for questioning in connection with felony, destruction of property, reckless endangerment, and violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Please come with us. Brenda Miller's face contorted in disbelief and outrage as the patrolman placed her in handcuffs. You can't arrest me. I was just doing my job. Margaret, tell them I was authorized. Margaret Henderson, however, remained silent, her face a mask of stunned disbelief as she watched Brenda being led to the police car. The meticulously ordered world of Willow Creek Estates was fracturing, and Margaret Henderson's iron grip was slipping away. Sarah watched Brenda being driven away, a cold sense of justice beginning to stir within her, but she knew this was just the beginning. The real consequences for the HOA and for the culture of petty tyranny it fostered were yet to come. The immediate aftermath of Brenda Miller's arrest sent shockwaves through Willow Creek Estates. The carefully manicured lawns became the stage for hushed, anxious conversations. The HOA's email list buzzed with a frantic mixture of outrage, disbelief, and thinly veiled fear. Margaret Henderson retreated into her stately brick home, the heavy oak door closing with a resounding thud, effectively cutting off all communication. Sarah, meanwhile, focused on Eleanor. The police had secured the scene, and Sarah immediately contacted a reputable contractor specializing in ADA-compliant construction. Mr. Henderson, a quiet man who lived several houses down and had witnessed Brenda's rampage, offered his assistance, his face etched with genuine concern. He helped Sarah clear the smaller debris and secure the remaining portion of the ramp. Sarah, this is just awful, Mr. Henderson said, shaking his head. Brenda, she's been causing trouble for a while, but this is beyond the pale. We had no idea. Thank you, Robert, Sarah said, managing a tight smile. We appreciate your help. The contractor, Maria Rodriguez, arrived within the hour, her expression one of professional concern, mixed with a hint of outrage. "Sarah, I heard what happened. Unbelievable. We'll get a safe temporary ramp installed by tonight, and we'll start planning a permanent code-compliant and frankly beautiful replacement first thing Monday." While Maria and her crew worked diligently, Sarah fielded calls. Detective Davies confirmed that Brenda was being formally charged and that the investigation into potential civil rights violations by the HOA was underway. Sarah's contact at the Attorney General's office. David Chen assured her that his team was ready to launch a parallel state-level investigation into the HOA's compliance with disability rights laws and building codes. The wheels of justice were turning, and they were turning fast. Later that evening, the HOA's lawyer, a nervous young man named Timothy Green, finally contacted Sarah. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "Ms. Jenkins Vance. Sarah, this is Timothy Green representing the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. We are deeply concerned about the events of today. The board wishes to convey their sincerest apologies to you and Mrs. Vance for the distress caused by Ms. Miller's actions. We want to assure you that Ms. Miller's behavior was unauthorized and does not reflect the views of the HOA." Sarah listened, her gaze fixed on the temporary ramp taking shape outside her window. "Mr. Green," she said, her voice calm but firm. Ms. Miller's actions did not occur in a vacuum. She was acting as an agent of the Willow Creek Estates HOA under the leadership of Margaret Henderson. The HOA has a responsibility for the conduct of its agents. This is not just about a damaged ramp. This is about a pattern of disregard for the rights and well-being of residents, particularly those with disabilities. And it is about a blatant violation of federal and state law. Green stammered, "Yes, well, the board has convened an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. We intend to take immediate action, including Ms. Miller's termination and a full review of our policies and procedures. We would very much like to discuss a resolution with you to ensure that Mrs. Vance's needs are fully met and that we can rectify this situation." Rectification. "Mr. Green will involve more than just replacing a ramp," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "It will require a fundamental shift in the culture of the Willow Creek Estates HOA. It will require accountability for those responsible, and it will require a demonstrable commitment to upholding the rights of all residents, including those with disabilities as mandated by law." She paused, then delivered the blow she had been preparing. "You see, Mr. Green, while you and the Willow Creek Estates HOA may not be fully aware of my professional background, I assure you that I am intimately familiar with the relevant statutes and regulations concerning building codes, accessibility, and disability rights. In fact, I happen to be the director of the State Division of Building Codes and Standards." The silence on the other end of the line was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah could almost feel the young lawyer's panic radiating through the phone. You're the director," Green finally managed to stammer. "That is correct, Mr. Green." Sarah replied, her voice now carrying the full weight of her office. "And I can assure you that my department takes matters of accessibility and code compliance very seriously, given the egregious and frankly illegal actions taken by an agent of the Willow Creek Estates HOA today. I have already initiated a comprehensive review of all common areas and architectural approvals within your community to ensure full compliance with state building codes and the Americans with Disabilities Act. My inspectors will be on site within the week." She could almost hear Green gulp. But wouldn't that be a conflict of interest?" "My personal experience today is a matter for the police and the Attorney General's office," Sarah said calmly. "My professional responsibility as the director of the State Division of Building Codes and Standards is to ensure the safety and legality of all construction and accessibility within the state. The actions of your HOA have clearly demonstrated a potential pattern of non-compliance and a disregard for the rights of disabled residents, which falls squarely within my department's jurisdiction. I assure you, Mr. Green, this review will be thorough and impartial. I suggest you advise your clients to cooperate fully." The phone line clicked. Sarah hung up, a grim satisfaction settling over her. The petty tyranny of Willow Creek Estates was about to face the full force of the law, wielded by someone they had foolishly underestimated. The official notification from the State Division of Building Codes and Standards arrived at the Willow Creek Estates HOA office the following Monday morning, hand-delivered by a uniformed state trooper. It was a formal document outlining the commencement of an immediate and comprehensive compliance audit of all common areas, architectural guidelines, and past approvals within the entire Willow Creek Estates development. It cited specific state statutes and the ADA, emphasizing the state's commitment to ensuring accessibility and preventing discrimination against individuals with disabilities. The news spread through Willow Creek like wildfire, triggering a fresh wave of panic and recriminations. Margaret Henderson, facing a potential state investigation, a civil rights lawsuit, and a community in uproar, was forced to resign as HOA president. The remaining board members, scrambling to distance themselves from the debacle, issued a public statement condemning Brenda Miller's actions and pledging full cooperation with all investigations. Brenda herself, out on bail but facing serious criminal charges and the very real prospect of jail time, remained silent, her initial arrogance replaced by a palpable fear. Sarah's department descended upon Willow Creek Estates with quiet, methodical efficiency. Teams of inspectors armed with blueprints, measuring tapes, and a thorough knowledge of state and federal regulations began a comprehensive audit. They examined the clubhouse, finding numerous ADA violations: inaccessible restrooms, doorways too narrow, a lack of proper signage. They surveyed the common pathways, noting uneven surfaces and missing curb cuts. Then they turned their attention to the architectural modifications approved by the HOA over the years. This was where the true scope of the HOA's incompetence and disregard for building codes became horrifyingly clear. Numerous homeowners had enclosed porches, added decks, and made other structural changes that had been rubber-stamped by the HOA's Architectural Review Committee without any apparent regard for safety or code compliance. Railings were too low support beams, inadequate stairs had irregular risers, and many projects lacked the necessary permits from the county. Each violation was documented meticulously, adding to the growing list of deficiencies the HOA would be legally obligated to rectify. The rising action of the HOA's nightmare unfolded with each new finding. Homeowners who had proudly displayed their HOA-approved additions now faced the prospect of costly and disruptive repairs or even complete reconstruction. Initial anger was directed at Sarah, fueled by whispers from Margaret Henderson and her remaining loyalists, portraying Sarah as vindictive and power-hungry. But as the state inspectors patiently explained the safety hazards and code violations, and as the potential financial liability of the HOA became clear, the anger gradually shifted towards the former leadership and their reckless disregard for regulations. Meanwhile, Assistant Attorney General David Chen filed a significant civil rights lawsuit against the Willow Creek Estates HOA, Margaret Henderson, and Brenda Miller, seeking substantial punitive damages for the discriminatory act against Eleanor and demanding systemic changes to the HOA's policies and procedures. The lawsuit highlighted the fact that Brenda Miller, in her capacity as an agent of the HOA, had willfully and maliciously destroyed a legally protected accessibility feature, creating a hostile and discriminatory environment for a disabled resident. The midpoint twist, Sarah's revelation of her professional identity, and the subsequent state investigation had completely changed the power dynamics within Willow Creek Estates. The climax was approaching a mandatory community-wide meeting overseen by representatives from the State Attorney General's office and Sarah's department, where the findings of the audit would be presented, the legal ramifications explained, and a plan for remediation would be laid out. The community meeting was held in the Willow Creek Estates Clubhouse, a facility that would soon be undergoing a significant accessibility overhaul. The atmosphere was thick with apprehension and resentment. Sarah and Eleanor sat in the front row, their presence a silent but powerful reminder of the events that had triggered this reckoning. David Chen opened the meeting, his voice clear and authoritative. He outlined the findings of the state's investigation, detailing the numerous code violations and ADA deficiencies discovered throughout the community. He emphasized the state's commitment to ensuring the safety and accessibility of all residential areas and the severe penalties for violating disability rights laws. Then Chief Inspector Miles Corbin from Sarah's department presented the audit findings using visual aids to illustrate the code violations: dangerously low railings, improperly sloped walkways, inaccessible entrances. He estimated the total cost of bringing Willow Creek Estates into full compliance would be in the millions of dollars, a figure that drew audible gasps from the assembled homeowners. He made it clear that these were not optional recommendations. They were legally mandated corrections. Timothy Green, the HOA's lawyer, looking pale and defeated, then presented the proposed settlement agreement negotiated with the Attorney General's office and Sarah's department. It included a comprehensive plan for code remediation, strict deadlines for compliance mandatory ADA, and fair housing training for all board members and employees, significant financial contributions to local disability advocacy groups, and a complete overhaul of the HOA's architectural review process to prioritize safety and accessibility over purely aesthetic considerations. The floor was opened for questions. Anger and frustration were palpable. Homeowners who had relied on the HOA's approval for their now illegal modifications voiced their outrage, but David Chen and Chief Inspector Corbin patiently explained the legal obligations and the potential consequences of non-compliance, emphasizing that the HOA's past negligence did not absolve individual homeowners of their responsibility to ensure their properties met safety standards. However, they also acknowledged the HOA's culpability in approving non-compliant structures and suggested that the HOA would likely need to explore options for assisting homeowners with the remediation costs. Finally, Eleanor asked to speak. Sarah wheeled her to the front of the room. Her voice, though quiet, resonated with a quiet strength that commanded attention. "What happened to me," she said, looking out at the faces in the room, "was wrong. It was illegal. And it made me feel like I didn't belong here simply because I have a disability. My ramp wasn't just a piece of wood. It was my independence. It was my connection to the outside world. What Brenda Miller did, fueled by an apparent disregard for my rights and the law, was an act of profound disrespect." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. "This audit, these required changes. This isn't about punishment. It's about ensuring that Willow Creek Estates becomes a community where everyone, regardless of their abilities, can live safely and with dignity. It's about ensuring that what happened to me never happens to anyone else here again." Her words hung in the air, the raw emotion, silencing the remaining pockets of resistance. The vote to approve the settlement agreement and the necessary financial assessments was overwhelmingly in favor. The community, finally understanding the gravity of their former leadership's negligence and the importance of adhering to the law, chose the difficult but necessary path towards accountability and inclusivity. The following action involved the complex and often frustrating process of implementing the mandated changes. Brenda Miller eventually pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of criminal mischief and a civil rights violation, receiving probation and a significant fine. Margaret Henderson, though not criminally charged, faced a substantial settlement in the civil lawsuit and retreated from community life in Willow Creek Estates, selling her home and moving away. The HOA, under a new, more responsible board, embarked on the expensive and time-consuming task of bringing Willow Creek Estates into compliance. Sarah recused herself from directly overseeing any inspections or approvals within her own community to avoid any appearance of conflict of interest, but her department remained actively involved in monitoring the progress and ensuring adherence to the agreed-upon plan. Ramps were rebuilt to code. Sidewalks were repaired and made accessible. The clubhouse underwent a complete ADA-compliant renovation. Homeowners with illegally modified porches and decks faced the sometimes painful reality of bringing their structures up to code, with the HOA establishing a low-interest loan program to help offset the costs, acknowledging their role in the previous lax approvals. Mandatory training sessions on disability rights and building codes became a regular feature of HOA governance. Eleanor's new ramp, designed in close consultation with Sarah and built to exceed all accessibility standards, was a symbol of this transformation. It was not just functional, it was a beautiful addition to their home, a testament to thoughtful design, and a community's commitment to inclusivity. When it was completed, a small gathering of neighbors, including the new HOA president, Mr. Henderson, and several board members came to celebrate. The resolution was not just the rebuilding of a ramp or the fining of a reckless individual. It was a fundamental shift in the culture of Willow Creek Estates. The petty aesthetic obsessions of the past were replaced by a greater understanding of community responsibility, legal obligations, and the importance of treating all residents with dignity and respect. Sarah Jenkins Vance, the quiet resident who had been underestimated, had used her knowledge and her position to not only seek justice for her wife, but to force a community to confront its own prejudices and build a more equitable future. The roar of the chainsaw had faded, replaced by the quiet hum of Eleanor's wheelchair, gliding smoothly down her new ramp, a sound that now represented not fear, but freedom and the hard-won triumph of justice and inclusivity in Willow Creek Estates. The community, though scarred by the events, had learned a profound and lasting lesson, one that extended far beyond aesthetics, and touched upon the very essence of what it meant to be a welcoming and just neighborhood.